So how did it happen? How did Rome, the shining example of republican ideals, just completely fall apart and become an empire run by a string of tyrants, absolute madmen, and frankly monsters? We're going to trace that exact decay, right from this carefully built illusion of freedom to the pure insanity of absolute power, all through the lives of its very first emperors.
And it all really starts with this one brilliant, almost cynical idea. This quote from Edward Gibbon, it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. See, the trick wasn't to just smash the Republic in one go. No, it was to hollow it out from the inside, to let everyone think they were still free while one man was secretly pulling all the strings.
And the man who designed this whole deception was Augustus, a political genius, for sure, who totally got that people are governed by names and symbols more than reality. He built a system of absolute, total power, all while wearing what historians call a mask of hypocrisy, a mask that for his entire life he would never, ever take off.
So how did he actually pull it off? Well, it was a masterclass in politics. He never ever called himself king. Instead, he just, one by one, absorbed every important job in the Republic. He took the powers of the tribune, who was supposed to protect the people. Then he took the powers of the consul, the head of state. Then the censor, the moral watchdog, and even the Pontifex Maximus, the head priest. By becoming all of them at once, he basically was the state. His personal will? That was now the law of the land.
And then came the real masterstroke, the title he picked for himself. He didn't pick king or dictator, he chose Augustus. And the meaning here, it's everything. It translates to the sacred one or the venerable one, a word that you'd usually use for a holy temple or a god. This wasn't just a job title, it was a religious one. It lifted a mortal man up to something almost divine.
But behind that public mask of the father of his country, the man himself was deeply flawed, even cruel. He was so calculating, so paranoid, that he would literally write out his conversations with his own wife, Livia, before he had them. And he treated his daughter Julia like a chess piece, forcing her into one politically useful marriage after another. It was a kind of personal cruelty that perfectly mirrored the hypocrisy of the system he was building.
All right, so now let's talk about his successor, Tiberius. Now, Tiberius inherited this whole system from Augustus, but he just didn't have the same political skill, the same charm to keep that illusion of freedom going. With Tiberius, you can feel the power starting to curdle. The mask starts to slip, and you see this paranoid, cruel face of tyranny starting to peek out from underneath.
And this right here, this tells you everything you need to know about him. These were his own words, by the way, spoken in Greek right after he left a meeting with the Senate. He saw these senators bowing and scraping before him, and he saw them for what they were, willing slaves. He had nothing but pure contempt for the very people who were just handing him all this power.
And under Tiberius, paranoia just became official state policy. The old crime of treason, what they called violated majesty, it got twisted to cover the most ridiculous, trivial things you can imagine. Saying one wrong word, making a weird gesture. I mean, look at this. You could get killed for throwing a stone at a statue of the emperor, or melting down a broken one, or even just selling a piece of land that happened to have an emperor's statue on it. It was insane, and it created this whole new industry of professional informers, basically spies who got rich by accusing others.
And then, things got really bad. When his own right-hand man, Sejanus, tried to betray him, Tiberius's paranoia just exploded. He ordered the mass execution of anyone and everyone who had even the slightest connection to Sejanus. We're talking about a wave of terror. The historian Tacitus described a countless mass of slain, their bodies just dragged through the streets and dumped into the river, and their families? They weren't even allowed to mourn them. Fear had totally, completely replaced the rule of law.
So if Tiberius took the system and made it paranoid and cruel, his successor, Caligula, well, he was the inevitable monstrous result of it all. This was a guy who was raised in the shadow of absolute power, and he was the first emperor to genuinely believe he was a god. And his reign is just a terrifying look at what happens when a monster has absolutely no limits. He started things off by bankrupting the entire empire. In less than a year, he blew through the entire treasury that the super-frugal Tiberius had spent years building up. We're talking about an absolutely insane amount of money, and it was spent on nothing but pure, decadent whims.
And the things he spent it on, it's just pure madness. He built a floating bridge of boats that was over 3 miles long just so he could ride his horse across it for a parade. One parade. He served his guests food made out of gold leaf. He would drink priceless pearls dissolved in vinegar. And of course, the most famous story, he built a marble stable with an ivory manger for his favorite horse, Incitatus, and then seriously proposed making the horse a consul, an actual head of the Roman state. His mind was just completely disconnected from reality.
But underneath all that bizarre wastefulness was a truly chilling, sadistic cruelty. He apparently said this to his own wife while kissing her neck. It's just the ultimate expression of his power, right? The casual, absolute belief that he had the right to take a life, any life, whenever the mood struck him.
After Caligula was, inevitably assassinated, the throne fell to maybe the most unlikely person in all of Rome, his uncle, Claudius. This guy was considered a fool his whole life, and his reign is so interesting because it shows the rot wasn't just in the emperor anymore, it had spread to the entire ruling class, especially the women of the imperial family.
I mean, this was his own mother's opinion of him. He was the butt of every joke at court, completely underestimated by everybody. And when the Praetorian Guard found him hiding behind a curtain after they killed Caligula, they dragged him out and, almost as a prank, declared him the new emperor.
But here's the thing. Claudius, who was actually a surprisingly good administrator sometimes, was a very weak-willed man. The real power? It was held by his wives. First you have the infamous Messalina, who was so brazen she actually staged a public wedding to her lover while Claudius was out of town. After she was, of course, executed for that, she was replaced by the even more ruthless Agrippina. And Agrippina just systematically murdered all of her rivals to clear a path to the throne for her own son Nero.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What was the final result of all this? The reigns of these first few emperors, it's not just a story about a few bad leaders. No, they were a symptom of a much, much deeper sickness. The final product of this whole system was a Roman society that was just morally, socially, and spiritually bankrupt. I mean, this quote just sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? The very fabric of society was gone. Law meant nothing. Corruption was everywhere, and the city of Rome itself had become, in Draper's words, a hell. This is where Augustus's grand political experiment eventually led.
You can see this decay so clearly if you just look at the most basic social institution of all, the family. Marriage was a total joke. Promiscuity was the norm. There was a saying that Roman women counted the years not by the consuls in office, but by the number of husbands they'd divorced. In a society like this, not having children was actually considered a blessing.
And the historian Tacitus, who actually lived through the end of this period, he gives us this just chilling first-hand account. Just try to imagine a world where being a good person, where virtue itself, was basically a crime that would get you killed. A world where, if you didn't have any enemies, you'd probably be killed by the treachery of your closest friend. That was the reality of Imperial Rome. Which really leaves us with this one big, difficult question. Did monstrous leaders like Caligula create a monstrous society, or was it a rotten, decadent society that produced the leaders it deserved? The story of Rome's fall seems to hint at a really terrifying answer, that the system of absolute power, once it was created, acted like a poison that corrupted both the people in charge and the people they ruled, each one just making the other worse and worse and worse.